What does modern political reporting actually look like? For CNN national political reporter Camila it's chasing lawmakers, countering misinformation in real time, and using social media to bring audiences along, often all in the same day. Camila gives us a behind the scenes look at life inside national political journalism and how she balances work and home.
All right, on today's episode, we are joined by Camila national political reporter at CNN. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to sit down with you.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here.
Camila, tell me really quickly, how long have you been with CNN?
So I joined the company in 2023, and so I'm kind of been a little bit over 2 years now, and it's kind of insane because I've now covered a plethora of things of like the White House, now covering Capitol Hill, covering DC and what was happening with the National Guard troops, and so it doesn't really feel like it's been over 2 years, and I'm still like wrapping my mind around it.
That's amazing. So, obviously, before I sat down with you, I had to do some digging, and I'd love for you to share with people listening exactly how you got started because I know that you were interested, right, in becoming a reporter,
Mhm.
obviously, but you didn't start off in broadcast.
No, it's true. People are always shocked when I tell them that I actually thought I was going to be more behind the camera, behind the scenes. And I actually, when I started off, I wanted to be a video editor. And I think a lot of that when I was in college and I was studying broadcast journalism was only because that was seemed to be the only major where I could learn how to do different things, whether it went to radio and broadcast and that side, or if it went to writing scripts or writing articles. And I ended up doing a fellowship where I went to Columbia, the country, and I stayed there for a few weeks covering the coffee industry and how it was rapidly changing because of climate change. And even there, I was like pulling out my camera, I was taking photos, I was taking videos, I did a mini documentary, and I was also writing articles. And I still came back to DC and I was like, I don't know which, path I need to set forward. But I started my first real newsroom experience here at CNN in this news associate program where I was like running scripts to anchors and all these things. And it kind of starts out a little unique, my story, because it really started when I started reading a lot of newspapers and started seeing what stories are we not covering for our network. And I started pitching out to like editors I was seeing when they were getting like a coffee break or a water break and being like, hey, I can write this up. And kind of slowly over time, I started kind of building my portfolio and I really ended up in the more writing space of traditional working for newspapers and writing articles.
It's really interesting, Camila, because okay, so you're a news associate at CNN and really, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like a glorified intern.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
But, what struck me about that story is that you went outside of that and you said, "Hey," you raised your hand and said, "Hey, I can do more, and I'm gonna show you I'm gonna do more."
Yeah, I just felt like at that time, it was during the first Trump administration, and there was just I think when there was just such a flurry of news in real time, the newsroom was learning how to cover just everything that was happening, that I felt like there was a lot of stories that we just weren't covering for our full potential because we just did not have the staff or the manpower to do so. But when I started seeing that stories were not being covered or that we really should be doing that and like how to help my newsroom, I felt like it was another way for me to also get myself out there and kind of do what I always loved doing, and that is just talking to people. So I also kind of was just like, while I was focusing on my day to day, I was kind of trying to create my like dream path and my dream job, and that was to actually report.
And so there's 2 things that are happening here. You're building your resume, you're building your skills, right? But you're also networking, you're making connections in that newsroom. And so, you know, did that did doing that help you land where you were at next and then eventually at CNN?
No, definitely. I feel like a quote that I always hear a lot, and you're gonna hear this a lot in the journalism world. It's like it's not as much important what you know, but it's who you know. And I didn't really understand that in college because I grew up, I didn't know any journalist around me. Even when I was in college and I was trying to forge this path, I didn't really know anybody that I could lean on and talk to. I was like, okay, I don't have this like network. I need to create my own because nobody's going to just give it to me.
And so what happens after CNN as a news associate?
I feel like I started writing a lot of stories for them, and I was really grateful that they gave me that opportunity. And I really did find that I started solidifying me like, you know what, this is exactly what I want to do. And I need more experience doing it. And so I started applying to other jobs that will let me be a reporter full time. And I ended up jumping to this new media outlet where they were like, hey, we just need a breaking news reporter. And in my head, I was like, okay, I'm going to leave this really big company, but go somewhere that they're just going to give me on the ground experience to write stories and report. And it kind of ended up being where they wanted me to write like 25 stories a day and within like an 8 hour time period. And I mean, this really taught me how to hunker down and write stories in a rapid fire, but also in a way that's accurate and concise. And I still didn't make up my mind whether I really wanted to pursue politics, but I just wanted to pursue stories that I gravitated to. And I felt like the constant question I kept asking myself when I was covering different stories, whether it was entertainment, business, or then started being more politics, was that question of like, why should I care? And if I can't answer that, then how am I going to best serve the audience and the readers that I'm reporting on? And I ended up starting to cover more of immigration. And that's how it kind of landed me into my next role. And I felt like that's kind of what's been making me jump so much, is that asking that question of like, what right now do I really want to report on? And why should people care when I'm reporting on this?
But, I wanna go back to what you said, 25 stories a day, that is not easy. I don't think people really understand how hard it is to write one story. So that's impressive, that's amazing.
I think when I tell them they're journalists, they're like, "Oh, you must be an amazing writer in this." And I remember in college, like it's not like I stood out. And I don't think I have this like air where I'm like, "Oh, I'm super talented in this." I think I've had so much experience where I've had to write on deadlines and do it so much to the point that you kind of forge your own style and way. And I felt like in the beginning when I was like, "How do you write an article like this?" I started reading other people's work, right? And kind of taking apart and being like, "Oh, I love how they structured this," or this is how they use the segue. And I think the biggest lesson I learned, especially in the early years, was that you don't need to be like another person. You know what I mean? Like you need to be like yourself. It's also it's like, how can I say this in a way where people care and in a way that's accessible and digestible and people can understand it? Because I also kind of realized when I started covering Capitol Hill that people love to speak in acronyms, people love to speak in like really complex jargon that a lot of people just don't understand. And that in a way it made it really inaccessible to kind of understand and learn in real time, follow along about what's going on.
When I was in, broadcast, that was the one example that I would give people who were not part of the industry that, somebody could throw a 1,000-page document at me, and I had 8 hours to basically dumb that 1,000-page document into a minute, minute and a half, so it was digestible to readers, and just to know that you can do that, I think is impressive, right? It's a skill that not many people have, so when did you actually start picking up your phone though and start going to social media and not just documenting, the stories that you're telling, but the behind the scenes and your everyday life?
Yeah, it's really funny because I started in like the most random way where I was covering hearings for hours on it. I mean, these hearings were 5, 6 hours because at that point I was writing these like really long stories, which I kept trying to tell them like, let's keep making it shorter so people can actually read them. And I think when I first started doing it, it was also in a own way to showcase my own writing and reporting. So I would show like, hey, this is what this lawmaker said, this 30-second clip. But then I'd be like, if you want to see more, here's this whole article. Because I also find too in the beginning, what I was grappling with was like, you can show a 10-second clip of what a lawmaker said, but without context, it can be misconstrued in a really big way. And so a lot of the time, since I was more writing based, I would just say like, here's the clip or here's this conversation I had with this lawmaker, but here's the fuller story. And I really did notice a lot of, and I used to have a link and I saw very few people actually click the link. And so I felt more of a responsibility too, to start getting online more, giving more context, breaking it down, but saying in a way that was digestible and accessible. And I remember my editors at the time, even though that wasn't part of my responsibilities, they were so supportive of it.
And so you were flexing that muscle a lot at the Washington Post, correct?
Yeah, so that actually what brought me to the Washington Post because essentially they have this position open where they were like, we want a reporter that knows how to think in vertical video first. So they're thinking in real time how to report, but then thinking where should this be a video? Should this be an article? And they know how to master do both. And at that point, it's like I was doing that for months on end. And I was even only playing around and I had my social media pages to kind of show the metrics and be like, this is what's working, this is what's not. And as I said, it really started with a side hobby and passion because I still loved editing videos. I still loved making videos. That wasn't a part of my job description. And so it was something I was really doing on the side to almost like kind of help. And I just did not expect that that would actually lead to another job where someone was like, wait, this is exactly what you want. So I was almost in a weird time. I was preparing for a job that didn't even exist yet. And when I went to the Washington Post, they were like, not only will you do this by yourself, like you're going to have a team, you're going to have someone to like help think of story ideas and video ideas. You're going to have a video editor. I was very they love the fact that they could be hands off and just kinda let me run with it, and I love doing it. I think that's where I found that I was like, "This is where I excel, doing multimedia." I think I always wanna do multimedia, but I think I had a really big realization where it's like, I'm trying to be a old archetype of what a journalist is, and that's just not me, and I just need to embrace the fact that, like, not to confine myself in a box and just if this is, like, what I really like to do and this is, like, my talents, then, like, I need to create my own box, and I think it was just really celebrated, and I did the best some of my best work there and other places because I was able to kind of flex different muscles and showcase stories, whether it was on video or through writing, and just be able to have flexibility and knowing how to do both and how to communicate on both different platforms.
We don't know where, journalism is going to go, just because, we are in the age of social media. What is it going to look like, right? A lot of us have tried to guess. What is the news industry going to look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? But, when you look back, I think, Camila, you'll be able to say, I was kind of part of this transition period where we were evolving and I was part of this blank canvas of trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And I think that's really exciting to say.
Yeah, I think it was crazy in the beginning when I started making videos, and I remember people asking me what's the point of it. And now to see so many newsrooms embrace doing vertical video and doing like the iPhone where it's in front of your face, like selfie style, and them doing it to break down the reporting, it makes me feel proud in a way because I think I saw it a while ago, like that was the future. I also know it's just really important. Like I can't predict what's going journalism is going to look like 2 months from now, 5 months from now, 5 years from now. But I can say a lot of what the feedback I get is just from directly from talking to people. And so even a few years ago, when I was talking to my family, they're like, I don't get my news from turning on the TV or reading the newspaper. I don't have time. I get it actually on social media. And that's why I started pivoting. Like, I can still do the traditional, write the stories, go on broadcast, but let me go where people are. And I think if that is still at the forefront of people's mind, a journalist's mind like myself, of like, where are people at and how can we make this more accessible? Then I think that's going to be, like, the guiding star, at least for me right now.
Camila, it's been so, interesting to hear how you started in this business. You didn't know what you wanted to do. You kept gravitating toward politics. You picked up your phone and you were part of this social media, transition for news. And then CNN came calling and now you are on TV. Tell me about that. How has that been? And when you walked into CNN again, did you know what you were doing as a broadcast reporter?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride because I feel like I've always led my career trajectory just based on my intuition and what just felt right. It was never about the big name or like what company I'm going to work for. It was always about will they provide me the resources to tell the stories I want to tell. And so when I got the call from CNN and to cover the White House, it felt like, okay, now can I take all the tools of what I've learned and kind of apply it to even a bigger stage. But at this point too, it's also incorporating broadcast journalism because at that point I was going on NBC a lot and kind of talking about my reporting and going on their panels. But a lot of what they're going to ask me to do looked entirely different. And then it's just really ironic because when I started out, I was like, no, I don't want to be in front of the camera. Don't put me, I want to be behind the scenes. I don't want people to know, you know what I mean? And so it was definitely a learning curve. It took a lot. They gave me a TV coach just to kind of teach me a little bit more hiding facial expressions. I talk with my hands a lot, and so that was just small things, but I really appreciated that in the beginning, we were very clear on my side and on theirs that they did not want me to change and everything to kind of be kept the same. The way I look, the way I speak, it's more just kind of refining to make sure that I'm being more concise in the way I talk. Because when I pick up a phone and I'm doing my videos, I can take 7 different tries on broadcast TV, and when it's live, you have 1 chance.
And that's amazing that somebody saw, that talent in you and they knew that you were going to do well on TV. And you're amazing, by the way. And let me tell you this, I was on TV for more than 15 years and even that last year there were still times where I was like, "Oh, I'm getting nerves." And I think that was the fun of the job, the excitement of the job. So, you never really get over it 100%.
There were so many great anchors and correspondents that were like spent years in this business and they always pulled me aside and was just like, no, like I like this. You know what I mean? Like the nerves never go away. Don't try to be anybody else. Like keep this. And I think I saw every imperfection or every time I said the word that I didn't want to say, or said something incorrectly. I said it with a little bit too much of like a East Coast accent. I like got on myself of like, no, you need to be perfect. And I think I just had to remember myself like people want to feel like we're having a conversation. They don't want to feel talked at. And so if I can make it feel a little bit more like that and show like I am a person, then like that's fine. And so I think I came into broadcast at a really interesting time too, where there's just more of an acceptance, it feels like, and more of an embrace of like embracing people for who they are, because at the end of the day, it's really about just effectively communicating to people about what's going on, like all the other stuff is just kind of airs. And that's the most important part of that at the end of the day. It's like, can you say this in a minute and 30 seconds? And for me, I'm a talker. So to condense that was like my biggest struggle. It's like, let me say this really quickly. And so you don't cut me off in there.
Well, you were already doing it on social media and now you're doing it on TV and you're doing a wonderful job. I want to ask you, Camila, what is a day like, as this national political reporter for CNN?
Yeah, it starts off, I think for some people this may be deemed chaotic, but I think for me it's just like my everyday life where I try as much outside of work to create a routine now that I have like a little one. And I start my days up really early and I kind of just get our like household settled. But it involves me sometimes going on Capitol Hill, spending all day on Capitol Hill. And we don't really know what the schedule looks like until really early in the morning. And so we kind of plan our days around when they're voting, what they're voting on, running after lawmakers, seeing if hearings are happening, are they holding press conferences? And I really try to take that opportunity to take a step back and say, okay, yes, this is what's going on, but what is the actual impact of this, right? Like they're voting on these like subsidies, these healthcare that's really important for thousands of people. If I was one of them, what's the question that I would want to ask lawmakers? I start my day off like really logging online at 7 a.m. and I'm like, I at that point still don't know what my day looks like. It's just really dependent on what's going on in Capitol Hill, what's going on in DC, what our capacity is looking like, who's in, who's out. And then I just feel like I'm nonstop. Like this is probably the most still I've been in a while.
Well, you're welcome then. And maybe.
I know. No, I'm like, great. I was just in the makeup room and I was like, wow, it's really quiet here. Like I have not. And they're like, you're never. And I'm like, I just don't have the time. I'm just kind of running and trying to take. And then I'm trying to run back to make sure I get my little one. So it's just, I think it's just a constant balancing act. But at the front of it, every day I start my day and I just really say, okay, what's the most important thing here? And what should I get from Capitol Hill in just terms of questions I should ask lawmakers? And some of them get really uncomfortable when I try to ask more pressing questions and I say, hey, like, what would you say to the millions of Americans being impacted by this? Or they try to say a fact and I try to push back on it. And it's sometimes really intense because it's not just me asking these questions. You have 20 reporters on each side that they're all trying to get their same questions in. And so you have to be a little bit more assertive and you have to be more precise with the questions you're asking. And so it's just a balancing act of my day of balancing broadcast with the actual reporting. And then in my mind, also making sure we have like video for broadcast, but then we're also having like stories and like writing and reporting.
Camila, how do you balance that, right? Trying to get the information that you need, trying to build these relationships and that trust between you and lawmakers or those people you're interviewing, um, with the fact that sometimes they want you to tell a certain narrative.
It's really important. I've always said this too for anybody that's covering Capitol Hill for their first time or they're a little new to it, is that you need to know the material in and out because it's very easy to get tripped up and be told a certain narrative, either when it's coming from Democratic lawmakers or Republican lawmakers, right? And I think it's really important for you to be grounded in knowing your facts. Sometimes I have my notes out, so I'm like in real time. Like when they say a certain stat or something that doesn't sound quite right, I just look back at my notes and like, nope, that's not it. And I think it needs also kind of being a little bit more bold and fearless in the sense of like it's okay to push back, right? And at the end of the day, a lot of these lawmakers, they're representing constituents, they're representing everyday Americans, and they have the right to be questioned and to be asked and to be held accountable for the way they're voting or the what they're deciding to do about certain issues. And so a lot of the times I feel like I'm trying to ask the questions that anybody would want to know.
And so you're still picking up the phone, you're still going to social media. I saw, you basically chronicled the shutdown and that really resonated with your audience. A lot of people tuned in to watch your videos.
Yeah, it was a pretty wild ride, just considering that the government shutdown lasted for more than 40 days. I will be honest, I started making the daily videos because I thought it was going to last a week. So I said, hey, this is something I had the capacity for because a lot of people didn't realize, but I was recording these videos before even clocking into work. And so this was entirely in my free time. And it almost brought me back to the days where years before where I was just doing this as a side hobby. And it's not like I was doing this in the office or, in my little workspace at home. I was doing this in my kitchen and I was doing this while I'm feeding my 1 year old and with my dog there. And it's just loud and chaotic. And even when I had this already time that I was supposed to be taking off to go visit my family in Puerto Rico so my baby can like meet them for the first time. And it was technically like, oh, Camila, you already had it scheduled. You need to go. I was still making videos while I was even there, just getting real time because I felt like I wanted to be an outlet where people can get accurate information. And if they're turning to me to it, I at least owe to do that. But as well, trying to take care of myself in the process, which at times was just like, okay. But I do think it was just really important.
The news does not stop, right?
No, it doesn't, and I just think that, like, I think in real time when I was reporting every day and kind of doing in my personal time, making these videos about the government shutdown, I realized how easy it is for people to come online and say something that was like totally inaccurate and false about what was happening. I just felt like there's so many people's lives that are being disrupted by this. I would go to these food banks where hundreds of people would line up, federal workers, just to receive food because they were just saying, hey, we are going without an income. Either they were furloughed or they were deemed essential and they would have to go into work, but they still didn't have any money coming in. And I just felt this just need to like just kind of go with this journalistic obligation of like, you know what? I need to report what's happening. And even if there's this inaccurate information out there, they at least know that when they come to my page, all this information is vetted and sourced. And I always tell people when I post, I almost make it, I feel like a million people are watching. Like all my bosses are watching, where it's like everything I have to say, it has to be accurate, and I have to hold myself to a standard because it's so easy for something to be misconstrued and inaccurate and people to run on it.
Yeah, that's the downside of social media is that if there is misinformation, it gets out there in lightning speed and it just catches on like wildfire. And so, what I'm hearing from you is, you feel kind of this responsibility and obligation as a, traditional reporter, part of this news organization to get accurate information out, correct? Even on your day off.
Yeah. I mean, I remember having this conversation a while back where someone was like, what's the difference between a content creator who talks about news and a journalist, right? And especially when it's more accessible now for people to go on Capitol Hill or get on the phone and kind of to report about what's happening. And I remember kind of telling someone, well, I think with a journalist, we have to thoroughly vet our information. And when I say something, or I say, hey, this lawmaker or some Democratic lawmakers are saying this, I'm talking to at least 10 or 20 lawmakers at the same time. And I think it's the fact that you have to go the extra mile, the extra layer to do that. I'm not saying some don't, content creators don't do that, but I do think that with journalists or how I was trained, you have to. And I remember sometimes sending private messages like, "What? This what you said wasn't correct," not to shame, but to just make sure, especially if they're trying to put out accurate information, whatever I'm going to put out, at least they know this is vetted. And a lot of times, sometimes I made videos of like, "This is the actual process, so you guys know," or if you didn't see me get like I interviewed 5 Democratic lawmakers and I didn't interview 5 Republican lawmakers. This is why, like there's a lot of restrictions or sometimes Republicans or Democrats don't have to speak to us, right? And so I think that also helped build that trust too because I got messages back like, "Oh, I didn't even know that." Like I didn't even know that in order to film, you have to stand in certain areas. And so it's not as easy as me running up to people. Actually, there's a lot of restrictions that reporters can't do that. And so I think that also helped for people to understand that process. And I think as journalists too, we need to do a better job at transparency in our reporting process so we can build that trust. So I think it's a two-way street here. It's not just, oh, they're at fault. It's also like, hey, let me show you. And I think that's why I started doing more of the vlogs and behind the scenes. It's more to be more transparent about it, what it looks like. You know what I mean? And so people have a better sense, and they also see you as a person at the end of the day too.
Yeah, I love those behind the scenes, and I love it when your kid is in the background and you're cooking, and I think that just makes it just makes, you seem like you're a real person. You're not just a reporter or a talking head on TV. You're actually a real person who gets up and, has a job at home first before you get to your real job.
Yeah, people kept saying, like, "It just feels like we're on a FaceTime call," and I think that honestly, that's not what was the intent when I started, but that's just how it ended up being, and I remember getting a funny comment of like, "Hey, can you, like, just do this earlier in the morning, or can you, like, do this when your child's not around?" And I was like, "No, I can't." Like, if I'm home and I'm taking some time out, like, he's going to be there. But I also think there's an importance also showing just how multifaceted people can be, right? And, like, I can care so much about I think at the end of the day, it's not just being journalists. I genuinely just, like, love sharing what's happening and saying it in a very digestible way and making it feel like I'm talking to my grandmother or you know what I mean? Or a friend that has no idea what's happening in politics. Like that's how I always felt like that's what I love to do. And I always remember being on Capitol Hill and being like, this bill got passed and my brother being like, skip to the point. What's happening? And then me being able to say it. And so a lot of times that's just what the goal is. And I end up tending to ramble, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that people have the bigger picture. Like I started doing that 30 seconds video and I started to gain more feedback. Like, can they be longer? Can you go a little bit more explaining? And so now like around 3 minutes to 4 minutes. But I think it's because when you make it shorter, people want more context. And so it really is kind of showing that the landscape has really changed where no, I don't want to, maybe read this full article. Like I want to hear an explainer, but I want it to feel personal. I want it to feel like we're having a conversation that you're not just talking at me and you're this like robot, And I think showing my family in the background a little bit, showing kind of like how chaotic my mornings are, but giving them a glimmer about what's going to happen, provided at least some context and information where a lot of people message me like, "You've kind of, like, kept me sane during this whole thing because I felt like you didn't speak in a way that was fear-mongering, you didn't speak at me like I didn't know what I was talking about," you know? Like, "Hey, we're on FaceTime and what's happening," and so I feel like that's what I'm just gonna continue to do, even if it's, like, in my personal time because I do find that's where I feel, like, more effective and helpful.
Yeah, building trust and making those connections are really important. And really, that's what gains viewers too. Camila, you are so busy. Again, you are a mom and you're just balancing, home life and work life. I got to tell you, speaking of social media, Newsbreak just launched a new AI curator and it researches news, chats, social media 24/7 while you're asleep. So if, you were to pick up your phone, and you were part of this new AI curator that Newsbreak has, is there a topic you'd want it to follow to send you updates? So you could just pick up your phone in the morning and you get updates right then and there. Somebody doing research for you already.
Already doing. I mean, right now, I think the thing that I'm like so locked in on is anything moving around funding the government. And I really just say that because that was like my entire life for a month and a half. It was lawmakers bickering, going at it, both blaming each other and not passing any funding to fund the government in order to keep it open. And I think we just saw in real time just what the impact was, not just to the hundreds and thousands of people where their families were impacted by, but the fact that all the museums closed, national parks closed, it caused disruptions in our air service. I mean, there were so many things, and so right now it's any movement happening for lawmakers getting together to pass bills that would fund the government for longer periods of time because people are like, I don't want to hold my breath, but I'm just getting really anxious again.
Camila, one last question for you. Um, you have been behind the scenes for years, you've written stories for years, and now you're on TV, you're on social media. Do you think there's something that viewers would be surprised about when it comes to journalism or being a TV reporter that you want to share?
um, I mean, I think we still have this persona that it gets very glamorous or all you have to do. I mean, why I started doing the vlogs is because people thought my day just looked like going into a studio, like getting my makeup done, going to the studio, talking like this, and then leaving. And people didn't see the grunt work of running, doing 20,000 steps on Capitol Hill, running around, talking to lawmakers, trying to like synthesize what's actually happening, put it into context, making social media videos throughout it either for the network or even for myself so I can kind of communicate what I'm hearing in real time. And so I feel like people are surprised that even when they read one of my articles, they're like, "Oh, well, you interviewed 4 lawmakers." Yeah, well, and those 4 lawmakers, I interviewed 40 of them, but I can't write a 4,000 word story. So this 500 word story is what we'll do. And I just put out the quotes that I felt were really encapsulating of what's happening. And so I think people are really surprised, like behind the scenes, the work that goes into it. And I think that's really what compelled me to make the vlog portion of showing my day to day, because I think people only saw the glamorous side, and not a lot of people were honest about like, this is what it looks like when you're really exhausted. Not only that, I got to do all this and then go home and tend to my little one, which I love, but it's just the grueling aspects of it as much. But I tell people all the time, like, the running around, I do love it. This is why I'm back on Capitol Hill. Like, I do love being able to hold lawmakers accountable. I feel like that's holding government officials accountable. I think that's what drives me. But then the other half of just understanding and having the access to run around and talk to people is just like the part that's like I find important. And because I'm in this position that I'm able to do it, I feel it's more imperative to be able to ask those questions that people want to know. Like, not a lot of people have access to Capitol Hill, and not a lot of people have access to look at lawmakers face to face every day. And so sometimes I have to think, like, if I was this person being impacted by whatever policy that they're about to pass, what would I really want to ask them? And how can I push back on some of the things that they're saying? And that's kind of like in my mind what I kind of think about. It's just like, okay, people think this is this, but they'll be really surprised to know that this article that features 4 lawmakers, I really interviewed 40 people for this.
No, Camila, that's a great summary of essentially what it is to be a TV reporter. There's so much that goes behind the scenes, but you only have this small amount of time to get that information out to viewers, to the audience. Well, people can watch you on your TikTok, on
Yes.
your Instagram. They can follow your videos. If not on CNN, if they're not watching you, I love your vlogs. I love your behind the scenes videos. So if you want to see exactly what Camila is talking about, watch her videos on TikTok. Camila, thank you so much for joining us. This was so insightful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I will continue to watch your career on TV, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Camila. Well, that is all the time we have for this episode of Newsbreaks Behind the Byline. Do not forget to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to Behind the Byline on your favorite platform, Newsbreak. Until then, I'm Maria Sid Medina. We will see you soon.